Hello, and welcome back to another episode of PlantCare.club, where we care about your plants. So, what do we do in the show? On this show, we like to say we do three things. Number one, we talk about your plants, your indoor and outdoor plants. Number two, we look for new products that are coming out to the plant world. Could be soil, could be pots, could be new types of houseplants, new revelations that are coming out, and some new varieties, which are always exciting. And number three, we answer your questions. So if you have any questions that come up while you're listening to this show, please feel free to write in, and we get to those from time to time whenever we get enough. So today we're going to talk about why your houseplants might be dying. Now, it's important to note here that when we talk about this, it's very similar to when you go to the doctor. And if you go to the doctor and you're talking to them, you say, hey, I have a problem. And the doctor's going to say, okay, well, here's a little bit of a change that I want you to do in your lifestyle, and come back in 2 or 3 months if that makes a difference. So then you go away 2 or 3 months, you come back, you say, hey, that didn't work. So they say, okay, well, here's a pill. So what the doctor is doing is trying to change one thing at a time in order to find out what the real root cause is. And when we are addressing your houseplants, we have to do something similar. You want to change one factor at a time. Maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, you can change something. Maybe first it's your water, then it's the sunlight, then it needs to be repotted, then so on and on and on, in order to find out what the real problem is with that plant. So, with that being said, today we're going to ask 7 questions you need to ask when your plants look unhappy. How do you find out what is making them unhappy? So, without further ado, question number 1. How old is your houseplant? How old is your houseplant, and are the seasons changing? So it's important to note that if you've had your plant for, let's say, 6 months, 9 months, maybe that plant hasn't spent an entire year in your home. Maybe it was only around in the spring and through the summer, and now you're getting into the fall. And in the fall, anywhere in the northern hemisphere, you start to get shorter days. The weather gets a little bit cooler. If you get up into Canada, maybe you only have 6 hours or 5 hours of sunlight during the day. And that's hard for a plant to adjust to. Most of your house plants are going to be native to Costa Rica or somewhere very close to the equator. So they're used to 12 hours of sunlight during the day. So when they see these rapid changes from, let's say, 14 or 16 hours of sunlight sometimes, and then all the way down to 5, 6 hours, the plants can start to go into shock and act a little bit funny, and they start to become unhappy. So that's something to really think about. Maybe your plant needs to just go through a cycle. It needs to drop a few bottom leaves as you get into the fall. And then when you come out into the spring, past the winter, that's when you start to see new growth and the plant is once again happy. So, question number 2. How old is your plant? So is your plant seeing any new growth? And should your plant be seeing new growth at this stage? So new growth is always a great sign of a healthy plant that's actually happy. This is an important one because if your plant, let's say there's a brown leaf on your plant, or some of the older leaves on your plant are starting to fall off, but there's new growth at the top of the plant. It's possible that the plant has had some kind of a shock in the last month or the last few weeks, and now it's starting to grow out of that. It's on the other side of it, and it's really it's hitting its next phase, and it's moving on from there. So it's important to note that sometimes if you see new growth coming out of I'm picturing a fiddle leaf fig or a ficus lyrata, and as soon as you see those new leaves that are opening up, you know the plant's happy and it's moving on. So maybe your plant's not really unhappy, it just needs to adapt from whatever was thrown at it a few weeks ago. So, next up, question number 3. Should you repot your plant? Is your plant at the stage now where it's outgrown its container? Sometimes we get a smaller plant and it's doing so well, it's really loving its new home and its new situation, and it starts to get root bound, is what we call it in the greenhouse. It's called root bound when the roots are so strong in the bottom of the pot that the plant maybe it becomes more floppy, maybe it's not growing as well, or it looks like it's a little bit cramped for space. So at that point, you need to think about, okay, maybe I need to change the pot that this plant is in, and give it a little bit more room to run, a little bit more leg room. We all like it when we have that. Next up is your water. So water is, as we all know, is very essential to the plants. An unhappy plant could simply be because you have changed the water that's gone into the soil, or maybe you're adding a different nutrient. Maybe the plant is looking for something that you're not giving it right now. So it's always important to take a look at the water source that you're using, and think about if you've changed anything. I have a friend that used to use a certain cup every time they were watering some plants, and their significant other actually used that cup to drain some oil out of a lawnmower. And later on, they were watering their plants, and their plants looked absolutely terrible, and they were wondering why. And we had to talk about simply the cup that they were using, that they were filling up in order to water their plants. And lo and behold, that is what the problem was. Their significant other used the oil, and the oil, there were trace amounts that were going through the soil, but when the plant is soaking up those toxins, it's not going to like that. It's not going to like that very much, and it's really going to affect its future growth. Next up, how wet is the soil? So this is one that is very important in a greenhouse or any large scale plant growing operation. So keeping the soil at the right level of not too dry, not too wet is a very delicate balance. Young plants want soil that is wet, but if it becomes too wet, you really begin to bring on bacteria. So bacteria or fungus likes cool, damp, and dark areas in the soil, on top of the soil, along the edges, that it can start to grow and respawn from there. So the reason, and now this fungus, this bacteria, fights against the roots of your plant. Your plant wants to continually grow and expand and maybe explore new spots in the soil, but the fungus is going to eat away at that root and eventually make its way all the way up to the stem of the plant, maybe eventually causing death. So it's important to note that you don't want your soil to be too wet. A good way of checking this is if you take your plant, and now depending on what size the plant is, what type the plant is, this is either doable or not doable. But I'm going to picture a poinsettia in my head. So if you have a poinsettia pot in your hand, you're going to open up your fingers and you're going to expand it over top of the soil. And I'm picturing a 6-inch poinsettia. And then eventually, so what you want to do is once your hand is spread over top of the soil, you want to flip it upside down, squeeze the bottom of that pot, and eventually that pot should be able to should be able to come right off. And what you see is the soil and all of the roots that are exposed on the bottom there. Now, what you want, the best place for your plant to be is you can see some relatively dry soil in that. You can see some relatively dry soil directly in front of you there. Maybe you have to spin it around to check it from a different side. Maybe you need a friend to help you in order to actually do this because it can get a little bit messy. But it's important to be able to check and see how much water is really in that soil. If you keep a plant with really wet soil all the time, that fungus can become a problem. Sometimes, if you're fertilizing very often, you can cause a real buildup of nutrients in the soil. So eventually, when that soil dries down, the roots will go into shock because they're so used to being in such nutrient rich soil that when there's not as much nutrients in, maybe you've gone on vacation for a week, right? So you go on vacation for a week. When you come back, your friend actually didn't water the plants as you asked them to, and now the roots are in shock because it's usually sitting in a nice pool of nutrient rich water and soil, and now all of a sudden it's in nothing. And that can cause some real issues as well. So it's a delicate balance, and there's no easy answer to how wet your soil needs to be, but you need to be able to feel things out. And it's just another question to ask yourself. If your plant is unhappy, you want to check how wet the soil is. So, moving on to the next one. How cold is the plant? So sometimes we set our plants somewhere near a window. Let's say you have one sitting on your windowsill, or a great example is usually at work. If you have an office at work, you can set it near the window. But then all of a sudden, the seasons begin to change, and this is the right spot for it to be, but your window is letting in a little bit of cold air. Now, this is one of the main reasons that poinsettias die. Poinsettias die because people like to put them near the window because poinsettias love to have that sunlight. But when they're so close to the window, they get that massive change in temperature during the day. So sometimes, let's say in the northern areas, somewhere in Canada, you're going to have the sunlight pouring through the window during the day, and it gets relatively warm. But it's not that bad, so the plant is pretty happy. But at night, it can go down to, let's say, -5, -10 Celsius. And at that point, all that cold air is still seeping through the window and really affecting your plant. So your plant is eventually going through these massive changes in temperature, and that'll cause some shock. So ask yourself, is your plant too cold? And our last tip is your water source. So this is a bit of a pro tip. So this might not apply to everyone, but it is an important note to take. So your water source. Are you giving your plant enough EC, which is a short form for electroconductivity? It's another way of saying fertilizer. So maybe your plant is sad because you're watering it, but it's not getting any nutrients in the water. So maybe you have to add in some fertilizer. Another option is pH. So sometimes the pH of the water that you are adding to the soil might be very high, or it could be very low. These are a little bit more of an expert level consideration to take in. So if you've said no to all of the other items, all the other 6 that we've talked about so far, maybe start to look at this one. If you want to measure your EC, or electroconductivity, there are some gauges that you can get off of Amazon or some other online retailer. I imagine there are some that you can get in store as well. And you can look up something. You know what? I might try to add something to this show that will give you a guide on how to mix the solution and actually how to test your own EC from the soil. The other one is pH. So you can actually, in some cases, you can Google what is the pH of my city water, and that will give you a decent idea of the pH that you're adding to the soil. Now, some plants, let's say Calabacoas or Million Bell, they really like low pH soil. They like low pH water that's being given to them. It allows them to soak up a lot more nutrients. Versus other plants, they might be okay with a pH of 7 or even 8. They don't really mind that as much. So you have to feel your way through and figure out exactly what the pH of the plant that I have, and you know what? If you have any questions on it, send us an email, send us a question, and we can answer that. Getting back to you on maybe it's a deep dive into the plant that you have. Maybe we have to talk about the pH of your different house plants, the pH of the soil for your different house plants, and see what you should be shooting for. Okay, so let's say you get through all 7 of those, and then you're looking at your plant and you're still saying, you know what, it's still not happy. I don't know what to do. Well, at this point, you can always, there are a couple of options. Number one, you can message someone else. Maybe in our community, that there are always people that are looking to have some more plants. If it doesn't make sense, if they don't live anywhere nearby, maybe you can search somewhere else. Try to find someone that can take on this plant that really wants a challenge and that can upcycle the plant. Maybe they really take it on and try to have that plant reviving and growing again. If not, remember that these plants are in your home for your enjoyment and they're supposed to make things better. So if they are really making things, if they give you some anxiety or you look at it and you feel bad because they're not doing as well, it might be time to move on and really replace that plant with something else. Maybe you ask your significant other or a friend to take it away and dispose of it if they can, and you at the same time go shopping for something new that can fill that space and that you can really take another swing at. So I'm hoping that that this episode has given you a bit of information and helped you out on your plant care journey so far. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them in. As I mentioned, we will record and answer your questions every once in a while. If you like the show, please share it with a friend and like the content or add a review that really goes a long way to helping out the show. And if you do like it, please come back next week. We try to put out content every week, helping you out with your plants. So once again, this is plantcare.club, where we care about your plants. Thanks, and talk to you again soon.